Whew, what a portion, right? Okay, so everything is in it, said Ben Bagbag. On Yom Kippur, amidst the collective confessions of this community, Rabbi Debra will share some reflections on our collective responsibilities. But this one, on today's reading, is a personal story, one about family. First, it is obviously not okay to banish a community member, and perhaps that's not even what was called for. Today, we will explore with you some possible ways that this might have played out differently, of course, with the incredible wisdom and hindsight of the 21st century. Marsha Pravder Merkin observed that Abraham had a lot of empathy for the people of Sodom when God threatened to destroy them. But he somehow couldn't muster empathy for his own wife, first passing her off as his sister. Merkin picks up on the wrongdoing of God's response to Abraham regarding Sarah's complaint. God tells Abraham in this portion, Shema b'kolah, listen or hearken to Sarah's voice, and suggests that Abraham could have understood it differently, as listen to her, not obey her and expel Hagar and Ishmael. Merkin writes, Sarah was distraught. She was lonely. She was frightened. She needed Abraham to empathize with her feelings, to listen to her feelings. She didn't need him to take action, nor do we need to hear God's words as a request that Abraham take action. The message here is that in several pivotal moments, our protagonist was not able to see or hear what was really before them, and that teshuvah requires cultivating empathy for ourselves and others in order to connect with what is really happening before us. A second observation is that any family that is apart from community will always be on shaky ground. Avram had been called by God to leave his land and his people, to go somewhere brand new. He and Sarah had no community. Sarah didn't have friends to vent her insecurities to. Abraham didn't have friends who might have said, are you sure that's what God really told you to do? What are you thinking? Maybe take a few days and think about it. We all need friends like this. We all need communities, networks of people with whom we can share and listen. So much suffering comes when people are isolated in real life, even if they may have online communities. We can see this as a call to be aware when people are hurting and to support them. This first point on empathy and the second point on community come together in this observation from the Jewish Buddhist Joseph Goldstein. We are all interconnected. We all suffer. So another's suffering ought naturally lead to compassion. But he poses then an important question. If compassion arises from the awareness of suffering, why isn't the world full of compassion? The problem is that often our hearts are not open to feel pain. We move away from pain, close off, and become defended. By closing ourselves off from suffering, however, we also close ourselves to our own wellsprings of compassion. We don't need to be particularly saintly in order to be compassionate. Compassion is the natural response of an open heart. But that wellspring of compassion will remain capped as long as we turn away from and deny and resist the truth of what is happening. When we deny our experiences of suffering, we move away from what is genuine to what is merely fabricated, deceptive, and confusing. You might notice a general numbness among so many otherwise conscious people, including ourselves. With the onslaught of terrible news coming out of Gaza, out of Israel, around the United States, much of the world, we can find it really difficult to emotionally and physically metabolize the news. I've tried not paying attention, turning away, but that's denying the truth of what is really happening. No one is exempt from the pain that humans have been inflicting on the earth and on the societies we live in. And none of us as individuals is responsible for having made it that way or for solving it alone. Our world is one of mutual belonging, interbeing, as Arthur Waskow says. We are each a small and vital part of a much larger process of turning and healing. We each hold a piece of the collective pain, which stems from our interconnectivity. Systems need feedback, and acknowledging our pain is part of that feedback loop. Climate activist and Buddhist Joanna Macy taught, when we reconnect with life by choosing to bear our pain for it, the mind retrieves its natural clarity. The stories of Rosh Hashanah teach the same message. Hagar puts down her child, afraid he is about to die, and she sat at a distance, says the scroll. Yes, we all feel at a distance when a loss has occurred or is about to. Everyone, everything can feel so far away. And raised her voice and cried, says the text. Sometimes that is what we must do. Go out, go away, put down our beloved burdens, and wail. And then, perhaps, something may shift. Hagar cries out, and God responds to her son. Sometimes the response isn't what we expect, but it is only after a painful period of wandering and giving up and crying that Hagar can finally open her eyes and see the well, see the eternal symbol of nourishment. The learning is not only about finding another way when we feel trapped, but in coming back to our physical senses, our hearing, our sight, knowing through more than our minds, knowing through the integrated experience what is true, and aligning ourselves with that. In the darkest, most severe life or death moments of this story of Hagar and Ishmael, and in the second day's story of the binding of Isaac, a third way opens up. In both stories, the protagonist hears a call from God or an angel, alerting them to change course, and then they each see as if with new eyes. Looking at this story through the Rosh Hashanah metaphor of the cosmic courtroom on Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment, what can we see? The Unatana Tokef prayer describes the foundation of God's throne as truth, emet, and the style of ruling as chesed, loving kindness. If we are to emulate God, then accountability, judgment, justice, and truth do matter. Humanity and compassion are how we enact that justice, not through harshness. Kindness allows us to soften, to be with what is real, and to respond appropriately. All the more so, says Rabbi Nancy Flam in The Angels Proclaim It. Healing expresses midat harachamim, the divine attribute of mercy. Our human acts of mercy, compassion, and empathy make it possible for us to endure and to suffer the sometimes excruciatingly painful limits and losses of creation. It doesn't seem to be our task to add to the power of deen or judgment. Consider the instructions that we should imitate God's ways. All of the examples are instances of rachamim, of mercy. Clothe the naked, visit the sick, comfort the mourner, bury the dead. We are not told to imitate God in strictness and severity. May we learn from what Sarah and Abraham were tragically unable to grasp. May this holy season help our hearts open so that we may return, shuv, to the presence within our essential compassion and essential interconnectedness with all life.